Good morning. I am coming to you today with my debut novel, The Widow's Heart. It is one that I self-published through Amazon KDP. It was actually a pretty grueling process as far as writing the novel. It hit a lot of personal areas for me, but it definitely became my therapy. The whole process through KDP was fairly simple. I think the hardest part was getting my cover right. There's a few discrepancies that I wish I could change now, but I'm learning, I'm growing, and I can see that in the novels that come after this one. So for The Widow's Heart, it is a romance, a little bit of suspense, definitely some sadness. If I had to give this book some trigger warnings, which are not documented in here, and that's another thing I wish I could go back and change, and probably will, the trigger warnings would be the death of a spouse and some emotional abuse. Nothing too heavy, nothing too spicy, just a good, quick summer read, which is what it was written to be. So for this book, I will be reading chapter 14, which starts on the happier end of things for the main characters, Natalie and Lucas, and Natalie's daughter, Ryan. Chapter 14. Natalie hummed the last song on the radio as she walked into the office. She sat her purse down and pulled the chair back from the desk. A sound coming from outside made her look out the window. Lucas was pulling into the drive with Major hanging out the passenger window. She was unsure of the feeling deep within her. Butterflies? She was too old for that. But then again, it felt nice to get that feeling again. She shook her head and walked back to the door. Right on time as usual, Mr. Sutton. She leaned on the doorframe and crossed her arms over her chest as a sort of defense mechanism. Mr. Sutton? We're back to formal greetings now? Okay then, Miss Whitaker. I shall follow thee to thine office and give you my soul. Lucas stopped on the bottom step and waited for her to invite him in. Natalie rolled her eyes with a smirk and walked back to her desk with him following a few steps behind. I just got here myself, so I don't quite have it all ready yet. Do you have about 10 minutes to spare? She wanted to have it ready for him, but this morning's events had caused a delay. For you, milady, I have all day. He laughed at her huff in reply. Seriously, though, I'm in no rush, and please call me Lucas. We've been through too much to go back to formalities. I mean, the dog is attached to the kid, and I'm here almost every day. What more will it take for a simple Lucas? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Looking him straight in his eyes, Natalie spoke in the most serious tone he'd ever heard from her. Is that how you address the Queen? It took a few moments for him to register her sarcasm. She laughed heartily at his confused expression, easing the tension on his face. For a second there, never mind. Having a good day, are we? Lucas was a little taken aback by her playful manner today. He'd seen the news this morning, so he was expecting far worse than she was letting on. He'd seen this before from his mother. It was a sort of defense mechanism that kept true feelings at bay. Should he call her on it, or just let it go until she burst? He thought the latter of the two would be the best for now. Natalie didn't speak again until she presented him with his contracts and closing forms. The mayor had signed off on them the day before and faxed them back over so she could finish the quick closing. The town needed the funds, so there was no delay, and Lucas had requested that the due diligence period be waived since he knew exactly what he was getting already. I have all of the areas for you to sign and initial flagged. Everything that we spoke about is there, nothing new. You can read it at your own pace and we will finish it all up today. You can leave with your keys. She smiled as she finished her sentence, but it didn't quite touch her eyes. He knew then that something was eating at her. Thank you very much, Natalie. You've made this the most pleasant buying adventure ever. Even better than my private jet. He signed each form without reading over any of it. If there was one thing he'd learned the last few weeks, it was that Natalie Whitaker was a stickler for honesty. He could trust her with his life's secrets and never think twice. You have a private jet? She didn't hide her shock when asking. Lucas laughed aloud and responded, No, I just wanted to see what you'd say. If I did, though, would you take a trip with me? He waited for her calculated response. I come with a kid. Traveling on a whim isn't exactly something I can do. She looked down at the desk again. He was almost sure she was blushing. And kids get summer break. I'd be more than thrilled if the two of you joined me one day for a vacation. I'm sure Major wouldn't complain either. He slid the papers back across the desk to Natalie and figured it'd be a good time to get serious again. Now that the buying process is done, can I interest you in another business venture? Natalie looked up at him to see if he was still joking. The crease between his eyes told her that he wasn't. That depends on what it is exactly. My skills only go so far. Secretly, she wanted to say yes, but was hesitant at the same time. This feeling in her gut was far too familiar from her last letdown. It always started out good, but then would take a turn for the worse when she got comfortable. I'd like for you to help me with the remodeling process. I know I mentioned it before, but I'm serious about it now. You spent time there as a kid also. I'm sure you remember it more vividly than I do. I'd like for it to look as much as possible like it did back then. He slouched in his seat and waited for her to decline. Instead, she stood and grabbed the keys from the lockbox. She also gathered her work bag with pens, a book of business cards, her clipboard, and a few more items. Let's go. What better time than the present to expand my skills? She walked to the door and waited for him to exit before locking it behind her. I'm going out on a limb and guessing that we're taking your truck. Major wouldn't be too comfortable in my car with the back windows not working. She patted him on the head as she slid in next to him. Major willingly jumped to the back seat and sat. Lucas wasn't sure what to make of this, but he liked it nonetheless.
Hey, I'm Nicole, and this is my new YouTube channel where I talk about all things bookish, reviews, recommendations, and chapter reads. So if you enjoy content like this, hit that subscribe button, and let's get back to our chapter.
A few minutes later, they were pulling into the drive at the farmhouse. He stopped at the mailbox just like he did when she went with him to the showing. She glanced over with a questioning look. Care if we walk down the drive? I want to get a feel for what it needs outside first. Before she could answer, he was sliding out of his seat with Major close behind. Natalie had no choice but to comply. She eased the door closed as she stepped out into the warm summer day. If I knew I'd be walking, I'd have worn better shoes. She wasn't too thrilled to be making this trek in wedge sandals. She took a few more steps before deciding to just take them off. It was way more comfortable than wobbling on the uneven ground in her shoes. If it gets too bad, I think I have a pair of boots in the truck. Not sure how much better they'd be since they're about 3 sizes too big. Lucas chuckled at the thought of her walking in his shoes. That humor was quickly followed by a feeling of fondness. They'd only just reconnected, but could it be possible for him to develop feelings so quickly? Barb warned him not to bark up this tree, but it just felt right to be here, spending time with Natalie. What do you think about replacing the azaleas with a more tame border? Lucas wasn't the least bit interested in flowers, but it got the conversation going. Natalie took a deep breath of the floral breeze and replied, Azaleas aren't my favorite, but they provide a sense of privacy. If you keep them cut back, they won't be a problem. They just require a little TLC. The light pink ones have always been here. Natalie gave herself a quick reality check before continuing. I mean, if you want to replace them, you can. I just think if you wanted to keep the original feel, that it would... Her voice trailed off as he slowly walked away. The old tree swing is still here. How'd I miss it last time? He walked over and tested the ropes for weakness. Want to try it out? Lucas patted the old wooden seat and waited for her answer. Natalie gave it a good once-over before testing her weight on the seat. Seems like it's still pretty sound. Not too high, though, just in case it gives. Lucas pushed her gently and watched as she was taken back to her childhood days in the same exact spot. Natalie could feel the breeze on her face and her hair brushing past her cheeks with each glide. The creak of the rope rubbing against the tree limb was almost nostalgic. She closed her eyes and let the motion take her away to a place where she just was. Nothing beat the serenity of this moment. Nothing. Natalie opened her eyes and saw that she was soaring higher than she planned, but it was at her own doing. Lucas leaned against the tree trunk and just watched her in motion. He'd stopped pushing a few moments ago, and she never noticed. This was her chance to take him all in, a chance to take in his easy features, his gentle manner, and his masculinity. She grinned at him as she slowed to a stop, and he melted her with one in return. This can't be good, Natalie. You shouldn't be having these thoughts about him, or anyone for that matter. Natalie mentally chastised herself and stepped away from the swing. Just like I remember. It needs to stay just like this for as long as time allows. She couldn't help but let her emotions take over a little. Lucas appreciated her honesty and raw expression of his family place. Then it stays, and the azaleas too. The lank pink ones anyway. I guess I need to polish up on my gardening skills. What about the shrubs by the front steps? They seem to be taking up a lot of the porch view. Manicure them or take them out. He really did want her full input on this project. He hoped she would be spending a bit more time here in the future. I mean, he did kind of come up with this plan on a whim just to continue their time together. Natalie looked over the shrubbery for a few moments before shaking her head no. These should go. They aren't doing anything other than obscuring the view. It might take some heavy equipment to pull them up by the roots. I know a guy in town who rents out his tractors. I can get you his number. Anything in place of them? I'm a fan of flowers that don't require a whole lot of attention. Black thumbs, he said as he held his thumbs up for her to see. Natalie laughed and walked over to the front porch. She sat on the edge of the steps and waited for him to join her. To the left over there is the grapevine. She pointed towards a bundle of brown vines. And then closer to the corner of the house is the blueberry bushes. Your grandmother made the best preserves. There used to be a fig tree over here to the right, but I think a lightning storm took it down. What if, instead of flowers or shrubs, you planted some strawberry bushes in raised beds a little lower than the height of the porch? It's appealing, not too hard to handle, and delicious. She looked at him, almost expecting him to say no. That's not a bad idea. I've never handled strawberry plants before, but they do look nice, and I'm sure you could help me put them to good use. He liked the idea of small gardening tasks. He liked the idea of her helping with them even more. Do you remember that song a few years back, the one where the girl drank strawberry wine? Natalie closed her eyes and laughed before starting to sing. Lucas wasn't sure what caused her sudden change in demeanor, but he also didn't want to question it and risk her retreating back into her shell. Would you believe I tried to make strawberry wine when I was a teenager? It didn't turn out too tasty. Come to find out, you're supposed to add sugar and other stuff to actually make it wine. She laughed again at the memory and stood to move around the property some more. So, you drank rotten berries and lived to talk about it? Stomach of steel. Lucas laughed at Natalie, nodding her head with a frown. Can I ask you a question and it not ruin how you are at this moment? He waited for Natalie to answer. I guess so. I'm not sure what you mean by ruin, though. I think I'm having a pretty good day. Natalie stuck her hands in her pockets and looked around at the overgrown sour weeds. That's what I mean. You're normally so uptight and straight to the point when I'm around you. Today, you're just carefree and happy. I'm not sure what happened, and if you don't want to tell me, you don't have to. But I like you this way. I mean, I liked you the other way too, but this, he motioned toward her with his hands. This is like you're another person. Natalie walked in silence for a few moments before deciding to answer. Have you ever had something weigh you down for so long that you forget how to be yourself? You carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and it just becomes normal? Well, I feel like a little of that weight was lifted today. Lucas stayed silent and waited for her to go on. He'd seen the broadcast this morning, but knew better than to bring it up. It was her territory and her past to want to discuss with him. I told my 3-year-old that her father was killed in an accident. Today I had to tell her that it was an accident by his partner. I was afraid of how she'd respond, but she took it rather well. Now it may hit her hard in a few days, but it's something we can work through together. She slowed next to the old hand pump and tried to see if it still worked. I even had the help of Miss Lynette with talking to Ryan today. That's where she is if you were wondering. We're going to start a sort of visitation schedule. I'm lost without a kid attached to my hip, so I'm trying to venture outside of my normal box and see how it goes. By the time she stopped walking to look around with some focus, they were back at the barn. She remembered him looking for his hidden box the first day he was in town. He shared a few of the items with her, but not all. It seemed as if he had his painful secrets also. Before she could ask him about it, he started towards the spot and removed the board entirely this time. Lucas knelt down on the wet ground and wrinkled his nose at the smell of the damp earth. Spending a few years on a farm, it was something he'd grown accustomed to, but not fond of. His grandfather always made him work from daybreak to dusk. He rarely had time to enjoy being a kid. He knew it was because his mom was granted those freedoms, and look where it got her, knocked up by the farmhand. His grandpa always liked to remind him that idle hands did the devil's work. To this day, he stayed busy just because of that. I hid so many things here while I stayed with them. I showed you the box, but there's more. He laid on his stomach and reached in, up to his elbow. Natalie squatted down and curiously watched. There it is. Lucas sat back up and held the half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand with a broad grin covering his face. Really? You hid whiskey as a kid and nobody noticed it was gone? How did you manage that with your grandparents? Natalie truly wanted to know the answer to this one. Lucas gave a hearty laugh before settling against the side of the barn and opening the dusty bottle. My grandfather had this in the cabinet under his bathroom sink, all the way at the back so my grandmother couldn't see it. One day she asked me to take everything out from under the sink to clean the floor of the cabinet where the soap leaked. When I pulled this bottle out and asked if it was hers, she got so mad that she snatched it from me and hid it in the top of the linen closet. She said it was because my grandfather would never think to look there. She was right. Eventually they both forgot about it, and I snuck it out here while they slept one night. I was 10 when I took my very first sip from this bottle. I was so sick that I vowed never to touch the stuff again. He swished the liquid around in the bottle before taking a deep gulp of it. My childhood was full of working and farmhand stuff. I don't think I ever got to enjoy a summer out here without having to earn my time off. Lucas stared at the brown liquid before deciding to take another sip. Natalie sat down next to him and reached her hand out to take the bottle from him. He handed it over without protest. While you were working your childhood away, I was living the most awkward years of my life out here. I didn't have my mom or a female influence. All I had was Dad. She took a small sip and grimaced as it burned going down her throat. Your grandmother tried to help, but let's face it, the times had changed by that point, and she just made it worse than it already was. She laughed at a memory that she didn't seem to want to share with Lucas. He enjoyed watching her like this, carefree, relaxed, just Natalie. He didn't want this moment to end. He let himself get lost in the thought of Natalie and Ryan being here on a daily basis with him and Major. Not in the serious family type way, but as friends who just needed to be together, living moments just like this one. Lucas stood and brushed off his jeans before helping Natalie to her feet. She brushed the dust from her pants as Lucas let out a low chuckle. "What's so funny?" Natalie asked, confused. "Don't move," was Lucas's response. She froze as he reached over and brushed something from her hair. "You had some cobwebs stuck up there." He brushed them from his hands and stepped back. Natalie stood in a sort of daze from his touch before his words set in. Her eyes grew wide and her voice was panicked. "Is there a spider on me?" She danced around, rustling her hair and clothes while Lucas just laughed at her hysterical moment. "You never had a spider on you that I saw," Lucas continued laughing. "But I'm sure that if you did, it's definitely gone now." Natalie gave another huff at him and stomped off, still barefoot, in the direction of the truck. Major followed behind, but not too close, as if he didn't want to get caught in another one of her fits. "I need to get back to the office. I have to find out some things for my dad and try to get the thought of a spider out of my mind. I hate spiders. Hate them." Okay, calm down. I'll take you back to the office, under one condition." He waited on Natalie to turn and question him. She was so pretty when she was in a tizzy. Natalie didn't turn to look at him, but instead replied as she walked ahead. "And what would that be? I'm already helping with the renovations like you wanted." She wanted to sound perturbed, but the slight hint of wonder made its way out of her words. Lucas grabbed Natalie's hand and waited for her to look at him. "Join me for dinner. Nothing fancy, not a date per se, just two friends having dinner. You don't have Ryan, so what's the harm? And pizza and a movie. What do you say?" Lucas expected a solid no on this one. Natalie fidgeted with her fingers and seemed to be in deep thought. "Your rental or my house?" She smirked as the disbelief filled his eyes just before the smile covered his face. "I have more than cable, so I'm pretty sure that we could find something worth watching. Is pepperoni good for you?" Lucas stepped up to stand beside her. "Pepperoni is just fine. I'll bring the beverages. Cheap beer always goes well with pizza." He fought the urge to grab her hand as they continued to walk back to the truck. This has definitely been a much better day than he'd been anticipating. That was chapter 14 of The Widow's Heart, my debut novel, self-published on Amazon KDP. It is available in paperback, hardback, and ebook. Not yet available in audiobook. That will hopefully be in the works this summer.